Hello, everybody, and welcome to a wonderful rendition of Monger's Public Tasting. I'm so excited for the tab today. As you can hear with a little bit of background music, we're talking Love Stinks. We're talking about Winter Blues. It's been too long since we've gotten together as a group and done this. We're so excited to have all these friendly faces here. And I know for Will and I, these kind of deep dive subject specific tastings have become some of our favorite things. So we kind of get to really hone in and learn something tonight. So as you all know, hopefully no one just walked into this for like mild cheese tasting. We have a fun, pungent tasting tonight in front of us. We have stinky cheeses, blue cheeses. We have some beautiful wines, chocolate to end it all. And kind of as usual, my name is Zach, and I'm here to be our main host. We got the monger behind the mongers, Benji, and I think Will might be here. I can't tell with the amount of screens I have open right now, but if he's not here, he'll show up later and he'll be in the chat. Before we get going, by way of a couple of announcements, I know some of you guys who follow mongers very closely might know I just had a baby not too long ago. So I have a 5-week old in the other room here, which is very exciting. Benji has a 10-week old, I believe Alexis is about right now.
Yep,
cool. And Will's twins just turned 4 right the day before Valentine. So we have a lot of fun things. So much has changed since we last saw you that Benji and I both have kids, and Will's kids are a little bit bigger. But either way, that is not what we're here to talk about tonight. Tonight, we're here to get away from the kids, drink a little bit of wine, and talk about Unvalentines. I think, this month can be kind of collect going on. People kind of, hearts, candied this, heart shaped that, and we make from that and do something a little different, have a little twist on it. And I think that all of these cheeses, they get such an interesting rap, right? People kind of come up and have different preconceived notions about stinky cheese. And so my hopes tonight is for anybody who has not been indoctrinated into stinky cheese and blue cheese, that they feel like they understand it a little bit better. And for those of us who know what we love and love the funk, that we find a couple new cheeses that we've never had before and learn a couple things about them. So that was a long intro. Does anybody have questions before I dive in? And as always, you can feel free to unmute yourself. It's a pretty small group. Otherwise, you can just put in the chat, and Benji will help us hear those questions.
And as a note, we are recording this as we record all of them, so it will be available on YouTube after. So if you aren't able to stay for the whole thing and you missed some, you can stop by later and watch it in full, and we'll send out that link if you need it.
Thank you, Benji. I am going to call one audible tonight, friends. In terms of our cheese order, in the stinky cheeses, we're going to taste the FoxGlove second, not third, and Nababbo as the third stinky cheese. But don't worry, we won't get lost. I'm going to help you through it all of it. Before we start eating cheese, you guys ready to talk wine? Cool. I'm super excited for these wines, and I think many of you guys know I don't always taste through everything beforehand. I do a lot of work thinking about, talking to vendors, talking to people, trying to figure out what's going to be the right pairings. But I like going through it sometimes with you guys so you see my genuine reactions for the first time. I was a little nervous with these. We have such big flavors in the cheese. I did my homework yesterday and I tasted through everything, and I thought it was really fun. I thought the wine does cool things with the cheeses. Everything really showed well, and I think we have a lot to talk about tonight. So the white we have is a very classic idea, a off-dry Riesling, and we're coming from Mosel here, coming from Germany, and this wine's sourced throughout that region, so you get a really kind of iconic sense of that area, that grape in that region. And then our red is a blend from Southern Italy, from the heel. And both of these wines are brought today because they have rounded edges, if this makes sense, right? When we talk about white wine, we always talk about acid. And acid's delicious, that's what we want, but it also can be what makes it difficult to pair, and sometimes is what we're using to pair. But acid's going to be our kind of like wild card. And what tames acid in a white wine is sweetness. Not all white wines have any perceived sweetness, but sometimes we like that. And I really like that for this kind of a pairing when we have blue cheese and all that salt and funk, and we have the stinky cheese. I thought a little sweetness to kind of soften that. Otherwise, sometimes you get that acid, and it just kind of fights a little harder. With red wines, it's not about acid, it's about tannin structure, right? If we have a really grippy red wine or a big, bold, chewy red wine, well, that can fight with some of the already challenging flavors we might have. And so we wanted something really soft. It's very rare for us that we get to serve a 10-year-old bottle of wine at one of these tastings. So I really hope you enjoy, and that you sit and think about what that means, how it changes on your palate from some of the other things that we drink. You really feel how it's fully relaxed. This wine has, grown into itself. It is time to be drinking it. It is don't wait 5 more years to see what's going to happen. This is what's going to happen. It's a really nice wine, and I think it plays well with everything. I do suggest, as always, that you open up both bottles of wine. We're going to weave in and out of both of those ideas. But if you just wanted to open one, I wanted to make sure you knew what we were playing with. We have a lot of cheese, so let's start eating it, friends. Our first cheese, those of us who follow pizza might be somewhat familiar with this idea of brick cheese. Brick cheese is a really cool cheese. I think it's wonderful. Young brick cheese is what we put on our pizzas here in Detroit that makes Detroit pizza, Detroit pizza. Besides that, it's the dish, the deeper dishes, but also this really dense, beautiful cheese, not stretchy in the way mozzarella is. It's made much more similar to a cheddar or a jack cheese. Brick cheese is a product of Wisconsin. First time brick cheese gets made is in like the late 1870s or so. And it's a cheese that comes from the Swiss and German immigrants. I think this cheese is so much more similar to Munster than Munster. What I mean by that is our sandwich Munster that we all have enjoyed and loved has this great little orange all the way around, right? What that cheese is at some point around this time, we as Americans discovered we enjoyed eating Munster when it's really young. Munster is a washed rind cheese, Munster, Alsatian Munster. It's a really stinky cheese too when you let it go. But the Munster that we've grown to love is the idea of industrializing it, right? But if you took it in the early 1900s and you had Munster for sandwiches, it would be very similar to brick cheese, this kind of bouncy cheese with just a little bit of that rind forming. So what is this rind? You'll see in all 3 of our stinky cheeses, we have this kind of same color. And this is a very specific bacterium, Bevibacterium lineum, or B. linens. So B. linens is a bacteria that will start to propagate a rind that isn't being propagated by mold. And how do we create an environment that really is B. linen friendly and takes away all the molds? We wash it. So that's this whole term, washed rind cheese, is a way you'll hear stinky cheeses referred to, or you'll also hear a term called schmear ripened. And so literally somebody is taking these baby wheels with a little bit of salt water and a brush, giving them a scrub every day all the way around. And that creates this environment that bee linens just love. And all the molds that we generally find in cheese, they'll run away. And so what happens with bee linens is as the cheese kind of ages, you get this springy, bouncy texture, and it starts to age all the way until it can become quite puddle-like. This FoxGlove around the shop, everybody was amazed because every time we've had FoxGlove, it's one of those that you cut it and it just starts pouring out. This FoxGlove's really retained its texture. So before I get too carried away, brick cheese, the one we've always loved is Winmere. There's a couple other brick cheeses out there, especially as it's become popular as a pizza cheese again. But we've loved Winmere because it's a, multi-generation. I think they're on their 5th generation cheese outfit. And when you go to the cheese shows, it's always just Joe working his booth, Joe Widmere. And I just love that kind of simplicity. It's not a national sales rep. It's not this or that. It's just Joe shaking hands and talking about his cheese. So this brick cheese is about 3 months in the cave. And the one that you see on pizza cheese, it's made the same way. It gets washed for only about 3 weeks. And then they cryovac it to stop that aging. These are wrapped in foil, so it still kind of gets that breathability and starts to grow a thicker and thicker rind. What I find fascinating about this cheese, and really the whole lineup we have tonight, is stinky cheese we think of as like one note, right? I think of, there's many stinky cheeses, and there's kind of, once you start to really taste them, there's gradation among stinkiness. There's different notes that you have. You have like cellar stinky, you have barnyard stinky, you have maybe fermenting stinky, and I think they all have their own kind of notes. So for me, this one's really mineral driven. It tastes a lot more like, wet cement stinky, if that makes any sense. A little bit more celery, not celery like the vegetable, but in the cellar. Um, Anybody have any questions about brick cheese? Cool. I also, by the way, for anybody who does like the idea of Detroit style pizza, I have been hearing more and more of my cheese nerd friends using this on a Detroit style pizza. And I think that what you'll notice from all these cheeses, you get so much bang for your buck. It's a nice way to kind of up the ante, up the cheesiness with just a little bit of cheese. So you can totally still use that in a Detroit style pizza or any kind of melting application. So we're going to go from Wisconsin to Indiana. Okay. Now this cheese right here, the FoxGlove, and remember, it's the third cheese on the list, not the second. I'm going a little out of order because that's how they showed up, right? They showed up a little bit younger, a little bouncier, and without that quite as aggressive of a funk. And I was, I'd say I was disappointed for about 30 seconds, but then I was really excited because it lets us have this conversation, right? So often you're walking around the grocery store, you're like, tried it. That's not how cheese works, right? Each batch is different. Each season is different. And so it humbled me as a cheesemonger that I don't know what FoxGlove tastes like every time. I know what it tasted like the last time I had it, and this tastes a little different. And I think that that's kind of the fun of real good cheese, right? Industrial cheese is where you can go if you want to get the same thing every single time, but we want to change with the seasons. We want to, different cheeses. So go ahead and try this FoxGlove. If you guys, on all the rinds, literally all rinds tonight are edible. And when you get to the Valdéon, that's the one that's maybe a little funky. I would skip if you don't tend to like rinds. But I really would encourage you guys to try all of the rinds, especially on the washed rind. Remember, the rind is what gives it this flavor. And so if anybody is sitting with somebody who doesn't like really funky cheeses, you kind of have this release valve with these cheeses. If you try it with the rind, it's very different than if you take one rind off or two rinds off or three rinds off. So you kind of can control the funk. When I cook with these cheeses, it's something that I really keep in mind because heat will continue to concentrate these flavors. So if you're making a Taleggio pizza or a, aged brick cheese pizza, and you want it to be good for everybody at the table, and you have some people who just like mild mozzarella, maybe trim the rind. And I bet you can get away with that kind of a thing. As I take a sip of wine, I invite you guys to do the same and start to, I always love for everybody to try all the cheeses kind of by themselves so you understand the players and try the wine by yourself. But as I always say, don't ever wait on me to introduce something. Try everything as you wish. Just make sure you save a little bit. But start mixing the wines with the cheeses because I found it to be fairly fascinating. I think they act a similar way throughout the category. So the stinky cheeses kind of all interact the same way with the white versus the red. And then the blue cheeses have their own kind of switch. But I thought they were really cool what they brought out in each other. FoxGlove, yeah.
Well, quick question on the FoxGlove. Is it supposed to be very soft and runny was the question.
It is. And if someone got one, you won. So, mine was really pudgy. And, it's a small cheese. So I guess they could have some variability from batch to batch. Did anybody get a really runny one?
Looks like a couple head nods and hand raises in there. So
you guys won. I'm really jealous of you. I swear to God. So this cheese is Tulip Tree Creamery. They're in Indiana. We do a lot of work with them. If anybody remembers the Urban Rest cheese we did many years ago, that was them who made it. Trillium's the triple cream they carry. And usually what you guys see is Tiger Lily at our store. Tiger Lily's like a mini Taleggio. We'll talk more about Taleggio on the next cheese. FoxGlove was actually their approach to the king of stinkers, arguably, Epoisse. Epoisse is a cheese from Burgundy, from France, and Epoisse is a cheese that comes in a little wooden crate because it just is a puddle, right? You can't really cut an Epoisse and let it hold its shape. they're inherently very runny. And with FoxGlove, that's what they're trying to do. So a Poisse is washed with the mark of Burgundy, Marc de Bourgogne. This is just going to be washed with a salt brine, I believe. But they really wanted to have that incredible richness, right? I think of washed rind cheeses as, some people would use the word challenging. There's obviously salt, there's obviously funk, but they're almost always really fatty and delicious. There's an unctuous, a really a richness to these cheeses. And I even in the texture, as you sit there and bounce them, you can kind of see that. And we're going to just work down the line, and it's going to get a little creamier each time. For those of you guys who have a full-on goo bomb, you see that's the fully ripe cheese, right? We use this term ripeness in cheese kind of like we would with fruit, but the difference between ripeness in cheese and fruit is we all have the same idea of what a ripe piece of fruit is. And cheese, I think, first is personal preference. Like there's a lot of goat cheeses that are meant to be really crumbly and old, but I like them really young and lactic. You can like a cheese in different points of its lifespan, if you will, kind of back to that Munster discussion that I was about earlier. But the fully ripe, the peak of that experience is a fully runny cheese with some of them. Now, if I had brick cheese that was melting off my table, I would be a little concerned. That's not how that cheese is meant to be. But with some of these washed rind cheeses, that is the end goal, is a goo bomb, to put it lightly.
Zach, what makes the cheese runny? That's a question we just got.
Yeah, so it is in the world of molds, I am more confident that it's this process of proteolith versus lipolysis or liposis. So, and I'm pretty sure it's the same idea with this. So what those fancy words that I butchered is this idea that when we say surface ripening, the mold or bacteria on the surface is eating parts of the milk or the cheese, what's left over. So if it's going through liposis, it's eating the lipids and leaving you left with the proteins. And that's what you're going to get when you get a really dry, crumbly cheese. When it ages, it gets harder and harder and harder. For these cheeses, it's going through proteolith. It's eating the proteins and leaving us with the lipids. Same exact process that happens to a brie. But in this case, it's this specific bacterium that's doing this. A little side note for anybody, this bacterium is somewhat related to the bacteria that you would find on your foot, which is why people love to talk about stinky cheese smelling like feet. They're not so wrong. And there's a wonderful French saying, the feet of the gods is what these cheeses are referred to as. So we've had our first one, our second one. So the first one was the brick, second one, FoxGlove. Now let's move on to this goat milk taleggio, Nababbo. So I keep calling it taleggio. Taleggio is this, I'd say next to a Poisse, it's probably the most common, most well-known washed rind cheese there is. It's coming from the Lombardy of Italy, and it comes in these great little squares. Square cheeses are fun. I don't know why, they just kind of always are. And this one is a goat milk variant made in the same region. And I really wanted to show you guys, both in the blues and in the washed rind variants. We're such a bovine-centric cheese eating community here in America, but there's such cool goat cheeses and sheep's milk cheeses. And still to this day, I think we fight the idea that goat cheese, it should be a fresh log. Goat cheese can be any cheese, right? Sheep's milk can be any cheeses. And I think it's fun to show you these less common ideas with it. This is a goat milk cheese for our last washed rind. And I'd be curious, I talked about the cellar in the first funkiness. Does anybody taste it is so distinctly different than the first two? And there's one word that blows up in my mind. I'm curious if anybody is brave enough to say, what is the funk in this cheese? What do they taste? And while you do that, I'm going to try it with the white wine. Benji, was anybody brave to throw out a guess?
Not yet. We'll wait. We'll fill you with a question real quick. Well, while people answer. Good. So you mentioned cooking with stinky cheeses a little bit with pizza. What other type of recipes would you recommend if you're going to cook with a stinky cheese?
Great question. So it's about that texture, right? It's going to melt Perfect. And so this cheese is going to be great for a mac and cheese. And I really do love this idea of, if your go-to recipe for mac and cheese is sharp cheddar with a little bit of jack cheese, try putting 25%, 10% of the total volume of cheese as one of these, and just kind of see what happens. To me, especially if I trim off all the rinds, they just becomes cheesier. I hate describing things like that, but stinky cheese has this it's the uber cheesiness. And so when you just put a little bit in something like a recipe of mac and cheese, I think people just kind of get a little bit more pop of everything. It really brings out the whole dish. So mac and cheese, pizza, I really like this kind of in like a poor man's raclette. So if you wanted to just take roasted potatoes that have already been cooked and top it with one of these cheeses and throw it in the broiler until it starts bubbling, that's going to be a really nice way to enjoy it as well. Historically, these cheeses are often going to be served with like pickled onions. If you think of the like German original kind of Munsters and stuff like that, rye cracker, pickled onion, stinky cheese, maybe a thin slice of liverwurst, depending on your how hardcore and when the next time you're going to talk to someone direct. In the era of Zoom, stinky cheese is great. Worry about your breath afterwards or anything. So did we get any flavor notes, Benji?
We did. So we got some musty, some urine, some mildewy, and some hay.
Sweet. So the urine, I appreciate anybody who threw that out. I hope it's not too uriny. But the musty, the mildew, and the hay are all in kind of the quadrant of the flavor wheel that I was thinking. To me, it's fruity, right? It is totally this breakdown of organic material. Hay, musty. I think a lot, and this is totally because of where I spent a year of my life, I think a lot of harvest time in wine country. This might sound crazy if anybody has never been to one of those places, but if you're in Napa during harvest, you can smell fermenting grapes everywhere. It's kind of wild how just like the air smells funky for a couple weeks. Not so much harvest, but really when you start making wine. So all within that month. And this to me has that like breaking down of grapes, this fermenting fruit smell. It's fruity, it's musty. I think the hay especially is a good one because the goat milk to me adds an herbaceousness that's not in these cheeses, right? Our first two that are cow's milk, you get the salty, you get the unctuous, you get the stinky. In this, you also get this hay and all the things that goat milk brings to the show. What do you all think? Do people have a rank order? I would love to know what they think between the first three, if anybody has a favorite.
Just so you know, the person who put urine says they do love it, so it is not a turnoff.
I appreciate that. There's a lot of weird flavors that go in cheese, and I think that if anybody didn't think of them as flavor notes, sure. Like I don't go out to eat barnyard things very often. I've never licked a horse's saddle, but I've certainly eaten cheeses that taste like that. A Poisse, by the way, is a very saddle to me. It tastes like saddle.
We have a lot of FoxGloves as your winner so far, and then
cool.
A lot of the third cheese as well. So.
Oh, I love that. Good. FoxGlove and all of Tulip Tree continues to do really well in the award circuit. And we also have another award-winning cheese with the blue. So before we dive into blue, I want to do the wine real quick breakdown. I saw earlier when I had all the screens up, there's a lot of regulars, so I won't go too long into how we talk about pairings, but I want to do a group pairing session with this because I just really think that the wines are fun with these cheeses. This Riesling is like I mentioned earlier, it's incredibly iconic. You have that like little bit of petrol, that little bit of lemon curd, and how it plays with the cheese is fun. So let's do FoxGlove since people are digging the FoxGlove. And, I've been using pairing system for, at this point, it's probably been 11, 12 years. And Daphne Zeppos is the person who introduced this to me. It's this idea of the -2 to the +3 pairings, right? And so -2, orange juice, brushing our teeth, all sorts of clashing. I think that in some of these cases, really acidic wine would start to pull out the wrong things in some of these cheeses. So hopefully we stay away from all the negatives, but that's a -2. A -1 would be half that experience where maybe you enjoy one piece, but when you go back to the wine, the wines fall, right? Zeros is what happens most of the time, right? We're all way too busy. None of us are eating and paying attention to it on a regular basis. If you're driving down the highway eating a roast beef sandwich, you're rarely thinking about how the mustard cuts through the roast beef for this or that. It's just a zero. You're just eating. I also think that it's important to remember that not all food has this profound interaction, especially as we continue to industrialize our food. Those foods don't have the romance and have the ability to connect in that way. And so I think a lot of food interactions end up as a zero. +1, when we're cooking tomato sauce, it's not quite right. It's a little flat. I add my red wine. Now it's perfect. The sauce is made better. I've done no favors for the red wine, so it's only a +1. A +2, I'm hoping you experience many tonight. If anybody found either blue cheese to be a little difficult or wash dry cheeses, maybe with the wine, all of a sudden, especially with the sweetness, it kind of brings something out and makes it a little more palatable and you like it more. Those are +2s. If the saltiness of the cheese makes the red wine a little bit more interesting, and then the fruitiness of the red wine makes the Nababbo really pop, and all of a sudden everything's just enhanced, +2. Beautiful space. Now a 3, I don't aim at 3s. I think 3s are wonderful and they happen, but they require, more than what we can offer sometimes. I like to think of 3s as like having historical context. As someone who studied food my whole life, you hear the same +3s over and over, right? Port and Stilton, when blue cheese is like the most classic, you would have triple creams and champagne, you'd have Fagua and Sauternes. There's all these classic pairings. And what you're really looking for is the sum to be greater than the parts, right? It's the peanut butter and jelly effect. We rarely eat them separate. We love them so much together that should eat them. So tonight, if you have a +3, please let us know. Part of the reason I said we can't provide you with +3s, I also think company helps make +3s, right? I often have people come back to the shop after a great trip abroad or a wonderful dinner party, and they're like, oh, there was this wine, this cheese, and it was the greatest night of my life. And I'm like, I might have this cheese. It will not taste like it did that night. Those +3s have a little bit more going on usually. So let's go ahead and take some FoxGlove and let's eat a piece with the white wine. Eat a piece, sip of white wine. And now, same idea, and you can go slower than I do. I do my pairings pretty quickly, so take your time, chew, swallow, be polite, all those things. So, does anybody have any, at first blush, what they taste with these two different things and these two different pairings? Before I start going off and telling everybody what I tasted. But do we see any chatting?
Nothing yet. I think people will start getting there in a minute. So I think you were good.
Good. So actually, I'm going to go ahead and learn a lesson. I'm going to be patient. We're going to talk blue cheese, and then I'm going to come back, give people a chance to think about it, and go ahead and taste all 3 wash rind cheeses with the 2 wines. I would love to hear if people have trends that they're seeing or flavor notes they're seeing, because I really thought it was quite interesting. As you guys are tasting those wines and those cheeses and they're interacting, I'm going to start talking about Bay Blue. Bay Blue is the only day one cheese. And what I mean by day one is I don't think we've ever not sold Bay Blue. It's been on our first counter in Ferndale at Farm Field Table. It's been in Detroit. Sometimes we might gap with this cheese. It might not be available to us. But we always try to have it. And, a quick moment of this idea of gapping with cheeses. It has been one of the more challenging times to buy anything, right? We've all had delays in the post office, delays on Amazon. And for us, it's no different. Shout out to Kim, who's on this call. She helped me with all the sourcing now that I'm on paternity leave. And this was, between Texas and between the Atlantic, there was a lot of snowstorms and rough weather throughout the world, and international shipping was delayed. Domestic shipping was delayed. It's really quite a challenge sometimes to get these perishable goods. to you, but Bay Blue is kind of a rock solid cheese for us. It's coming out of Point Reyes in California. So about an hour north from San Francisco. Will and I spending a great deal of time in San Francisco. There's still to this day no creamery that I've spent more time boots on the ground than Point Reyes Farmstead. Um, they're a wonderful family operation. Jack Giacomini is kind of like this figurehead of the Marin dairy community. Jack has been doing it for a very long time. I want to say something like 40, 50 years in that area. And he started just as a, like many people, just as a dairyman. And eventually, with the intensity of the markets and fluid dairy and the collapse of, in the, I believe it was the late 90s, there was a major collapse in the fluid dairy market. He did what many cheesemakers did, which is they started to look for a value added product. How can I keep our family alive, working in milk? The answer becomes cheese. He was not ready to kind of pivot in the later part of his career, but he was lucky enough that all 5 of his daughters, who were like grown and had families, moved home back to the farm, and all 5 daughters work with him to make this wonderful cheese dream come true. Point Reyes makes Toma, if anybody knows Toma, one of the more popular cheeses in our shop. And they spent, I want to say it was almost 10, 15 years with just one cheese on the market, Point Reyes Original Blue, not this blue. Really delicious. Then they went to Toma. And then their third cheese was another blue. And I think many people were like, huh, why? And when you taste Original Blue and Bay Blue together, you understand why. Really, when you taste Bay Blue in comparison to like most of the cheese on the market, they hit a niche that just didn't exist, I think, or wasn't as common. It's a sweet and crumbly blue. It's kind of a gateway blue. It also has a natural rind, which I think is really important for this like balance of flavors in blue, right? Sometimes you see your blue in tinfoil and it has no rind, like the Barneveld, and sometimes, or like a Roquefort, and sometimes you see it with a really heavy rind, like a Stilton. And that rind gives us another flavor note. And right, so for this one, which is a really delicate natural rind, much more delicate than the Stilton or the Valdéon, I think it gives you a little bit more of that cave flavor. It brings out this blueberry flavor that I already find in this cheese. It just makes it a touch more savory. I just love Bay Blue. So now that we talked a little bit about blue, I saw a bunch of chats things going by. Did anybody have some thoughts about how the wine interacted with the stinky cheeses?
We did. We get a lot of people who really enjoyed the white with it. White +1,
Good.
red -1 for one person. White and foxglove equals apricot. We got citrusy for the white, earthy for the red. Foxglove gave the red a bit of sweetness. So a lot of people excited about it. Riesling people are excited about, and then Bay Blue people are already raving about as well.
Cool. I feel like we're all on the same page, friends. So what I heard in that is that the sweetness of the wine brought out some of the funk, and apricots brought out some of the fruitiness. To me, the white highlighted some of that mineral driven funk, right? The salt came out more. To me, in some ways, the white made the cheeses a little bit more aggressive. The red, on the other hand, brought out that fruitiness and that like mustiness in some of them, but it really, to me, it made some of them a little sweeter. I heard someone mention that. I thought they were both very distinct, but really fun pairings. I'm happy you guys are liking Bay Blue. So as we move over from Bay Blue, we're going to a cheese. This was the first time I've tried this cheese, was for this tasting, and I was so excited by how delicious it was. So Barneveld, sorry, it's a hard word for me, whatever reason. Barneveld is this great cheese coming from Tony Hook. I think some of you guys were on our tasting many moons ago with Tony himself when we released the 20-year cheddar. Tony's an amazing cheesemaker. Anybody who's ever gone to the Hook's website, it's not a good website maker, but he's a great cheesemaker. The list of cheeses they sell and make is just staggering. And, he's really known and probably considered one of the masters or best super aged cheddar makers there is. But they also make a Munster. They also make a Jack. They also make a flavored Jack. They also make a blue. Well, they don't just make a blue. They make a sheep blue, a goat blue, blended. I mean, they do everything. And what caught my eye when I was looking through their list, because I wanted to feature one of his cheeses, was this one just recently won an ACS award. You know, we were talking about FoxGlove and Tulip Tree being such an award-winning creamery, but I believe the most recent award, this one was 2016, best in category. And I mean, you taste it and you get it, right? It has the same sweetness as Bay Blue, but such a different texture. And I find that at the end, it makes you work for that sweetness, that salt and that ammonia. The blue comes out. We talked briefly about how a washed rind is a washed rind, or how a stinky cheese becomes a stinky cheese. Blue cheeses, this beautiful, beautiful kind of speckled look that blue cheeses get. How that happens is you make a cheese usually with a somewhat loose curd, right? We don't have like a lot of cooked pressed blue cheeses. You have stuff that is just put together and loosely packed. And then the milk is usually inoculated already. The mold is in the, but around, depends on the wheel, but at some point in the first week of its life, it ends up getting, and what happens is with the piercing, it's not that the mold is ever injected in that way. Those piercings just create little avenues, highways for the oxygen to like ignite the blue molds that are already in the milk. And then they kind of snake through and create this beautiful cheese. When I was a young cheesemonger, I remember that a cheese bomb is what we call it, when all the cheeses are out. And there had to have been like 6 or 7 blue cheeses out on the board at Zingerman's. And I remember looking at somebody and being like, they all look alike. How do you know which one's which? And they called me a cheese racist, which has always stood out in my mind as both funny and serious. But when you start to really look at, they look so distinctly different, right? Yes, they all have blue, but the amount of blue, the way the blue is, right, in the Bay Blue, you can see this really distinct piercing and these really straight lines. In Tony's cheese, you really don't see that. You also see a much like, I'd say less bluing. And then when you get to the Valdéon, you see it where it's taken over the structure of the cheese. You get these deep pockets. All of these decisions of when do I pierce it, what mold am I using in the cheese, how long does it sit in the cave, they all kind of give you those different avenues. This one is really just a fun, creamy, delicious cheese. Mineral Point, Wisconsin, from one of the masters. I also want to mention the name of this cheese is an homage to his first job that he had in the 70s at, I'm going to have to look at it again, Barneveld Cheese Plant, which is also in Wisconsin. Yummy, yummy, yummy. So, Valdéon, our final blue. This is a wonderful cheese coming out of Spain. And if Will is on this, please correct me. But Will, when he was backpacking through Spain with his wife at some point, he brought home a wheel of this cheese. And it was so exciting, except for it was vacuum packed a month more traveling until it got to us. And it was a little rough for the wear. And so I feel like it always has held a special place in our hearts. And it's nice that we get these cheeses shipped to us as opposed to backpacking them home. So this cheese is going to be 10% goat, 90% cow. And coming out of Spain, it has a little bit more, not even a little more. To me, it has a lot more fire in it. There's a little bit more of the like prickle your tongue gets from the salt and the ammonia. Historically, these cheeses are wrapped in large sycamore leaves. Nowadays, it's a lot to get a cheese wrapped in sycamore into the US than it is just to get a cheese into the US. And so rarely see it wrapped in sycamore. I've also heard that sycamore is becoming endangered. So they're trying to do more homage to the sycamore and less actually taking of these trees. I've heard both answers, but at this point you get a beautiful cheese with a foil imprint of sycamore leaves. And we get a natural rind once again from its time in its own cave, which I think adds to that oomph, right? If we think of cheeses like Roquefort, they're equally punchy, but the punch is a little different. It doesn't have the earthiness, the caviness into it as well. So I think it's time to do that same wine experiment with the cheeses. I find it to be really interesting to see the trends we get. And I'd also love to hear, same idea, what cheeses are you guys really into in the blues? I think, Benji,
I was
go
gonna say
ahead.
Bay Blue definitely is a favorite. A lot of people tasted the nuttiness, the almonds in Bay Blue. The Barneveld fizzled like pop rocks to somebody. Barneveld with the white is wonderful and spicy, so kind of went ahead with that a little bit. And then one person did ask, why don't the last two have rinds? It might just have been how their cheeses were cut, but you can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so the Valdéon should have had a rind, and if you didn't, then Benji's right. Someone cut you a weird piece. The Barneveld doesn't have a rind because it's a I'm trying to remember what the term is for these rindless blue cheeses, but I mentioned earlier that the natural rind, like a Stilton, is one option. But when you just take a blue cheese, wrap it in oil, they tend not to grow any rind. And I think that that's a conscious decision of a cheesemaker when they want a cheese, no pun intended, for something that's funky, but they want it to have a really clean flavor, right? I don't want cave. I don't want the wooden boards that it's sat on. I don't want any of these other flavors. I just want blue. If you think of cheese like Maytag Blue is a classic foil wrapped blue cheese. Original Blue from Point Reyes is also, Roquefort is another one. There is no rind because they just want it to be blue, blue, blue all the way through. And I think that with the Valdéon or the Bay Blue, you grow a little bit of a rind as another flavor note. I want a little caviness to mix with this. Yeah, that is what I would say. I also just want to shout out the fizziness that someone said that I thought that was a great description. His goat blue has a lot of acid in it, and so it does tickle the tongue in a different way. Yeah, great flavor notes, friends. I'm very impressed. All right, and then Bay Blue, someone said almond husk or almond. That was the last thing I wanted to mention. Because I've been there so many times, I always imagine the feed barn. It's a part of the tour where you stand in the middle of this really large barn and they talk to you kind of out of the elements in a quieter area, tell you a little bit of thing, and you're sitting with these three giant bins. And these cheeses are almost all grass fed, right? There's beautiful lush pastures in Marin, and the three bins that help supplement these cows' diets and their nutrition is full of alfalfa, almond husks, ooh, and what's the third one? Third one escapes me right now, but the fact that somebody said they taste an almondiness, I mean, they're literally, these cows are eating very little, and almond husks, the green part of almonds, is a part of what their diet is. So you might have been right on there. All right, let's do, in case you already haven't, our little tasting experiment. I think sounds like it's the winner so far. So let's go ahead and taste Bay Blue with light. I also heard in those tasting notes, someone said they liked the white with one of the cheeses because it was spicy. And anybody who, loves to cook at home or loves wine pairings, you might remember that off-dry Rieslings or Gewürztraminers are like some of the best wines with spicy foods, with Asian foods, with, these things that sometimes are really hard to pair because same reason as we were talking earlier, if you just have the acid and that fiery flavors, you kind of get out of control. So the sweetness helps bring it back a little bit. So I love that you guys mentioned that. All right, now Bay Blue with the red. So for me, the wine's kind of reversed roles. I find the white totally brings out the fruit. And I get some of those kind of stone fruit notes with the white and the Bay Blue. And then the red, that brings out the cave, it brings out the earth, a little bit of the spiciness. How they reacted with the stinky cheeses is very different to me than how they act with the blue cheeses. I also want to just say that the same idea applies to blue cheese as it does to stinky cheese, where a little bit of cheese can add a lot to your dish. Cooking with blue cheeses can go well beyond just your dressings. Not to, besmirch blue cheese dressing, one of my favorite things, But I think putting a little bit of blue cheese in a mac and cheese, or adding it to your pasta sauce, or a little bit of blue cheese on a pizza can really bring it up very quickly. One of my favorite pizzas is definitely the fig balsamic blue cheese. It's just, there's so much going on, but if I did that same pizza with mozzarella, it would just become a fig balsamic pizza. You need something when you have those bigger toppings, you need something that's going to hold its own. So blue cheese ends up being delicious. And I also want to shout out one of my favorite first ways that I started enjoying blue cheese is you can melt this stuff on potatoes. If anybody remembers Ashley's Bar in Ann Arbor, their Stilton fries. It's probably the first time I ever ate anything with like a lot of blue cheese was at Ashley's. Wonderful, wonderful place. But yeah, please cook with blue cheese, incorporate it in things. I think people are still so blue scared in some ways. And I also find it's really funny. Being a cheesemonger is like we peddle in the esoteric and the nuance. And so often people come up to us and are like, oh, I want a really stinky cheese, or I want the funkiest cheese. Or I find sometimes people call these stinky. And to me, blue cheeses are blue cheese and stinky cheeses are stinky cheese. When I use the word stinky, I'd say 100% of the time referring to Bevibacterium lineum, washed rind cheeses. Funk is a term used for everything, but I always think it's funny when people ask for a really stinky blue cheese. I just don't think of them as that stinky. I think of them as blue. I don't know. It's what happens when you sit there and think about cheese too much. But what did you guys think of the wine pairings with the blue? Does anybody have any of them that stood out?
We did get another comment about the Barneveld adding a little bit of spice, which is good. A lot of people talking about their recipes with blue cheese. We have a blue cheese sauce on steak, a killer blue cheese scallop potato recipe, some polenta with gorgonzola. So a lot of people definitely into the cooking with blues.
Good. I love all those ideas. Blue cheese on steak sounds delicious right now.
Zach,
yes,
can
Will.
I jump in?
Please.
Blue cheese, though, can be incredibly stinky, which is, it's definitely why it gets that reputation. Shortly after we first opened up the store in Ferndale, we got in a wheel of Roquefort, and Zach, it comes in like a plastic bag, and it's wrapped in like a cheese diaper essentially. And Zach like cut the bag open and spilled, and it's like just loaded with liquid, like Roquefort liquid, which is, for those of you who don't know, it's a French blue cheese, sheep's milk, and it's incredibly pungent. And Zach spilled the liquid from the bag of blue cheese all over his shoes. And
I
the rest
believe
of
they
the
were
day,
new.
like, this is when we were still on the shop in Farmfield table. Like, guys were walking in and be like, oh man, it smells like the farm in here. Did somebody step in horse shit? Like it was
Yeah, literally,
it was
you have
pretty epic.
a room full of butchers, like covered in raw meat, being like, something smells over by the cheese shop. I mean, that when you get a butcher's attention with a stink, something's going on. I also think
Did
those
you
were
throw
new
those shoes
shoots.
away?
Yeah, definitely. Roquefort slime is it's very special. I would also say, we wash our hands dozens of times per day, and washed rind cheeses, they don't come off your hands the same way. There are definitely nights. A plus, I know I mentioned earlier, if you cut a plus any time of the day, no matter how many times you wash your head, when you lay your head down on the pillow and put your hands up there, you're going to remember you cut a plus. Roquefort is the same. They have some lasting power, some staying power with them. Thank you for that trip down memory lane, Will. And Will, when you were in Spain, was it Valdéon that you tried to bring back?
I'm trying to remember if it was Valdéon or Cabrales.
Yeah.
And I tasted it in the cheese shop in Spain, and it was like, oh, this is great. Zach's got to try this because he doesn't love Spanish cheeses as much as I think he should. And so I figured, if I get a whole wheel, it'll, if it had been a cut piece, I knew that it would never make it all the way home. I was supposed to be in Spain for, it was the end of a long trip. I was supposed to be there for another week and a half or something. And so I was like, a whole wheel will make it home. I never would have tried it with a pre-cut piece. So I bought a whole wheel. And by the time we got it home and I got Zach over to the house to try it, we opened it up and it was just wrecked. I mean, it was so bad, but certain cheeses, like if I had done that with a Mahone or a wheel of Garocha or some of these other harder cheeses, they travel so much better. But Blue is so dynamic. It's very alive, right? And it's kind of like a firefly, it's got this like really vibrant life for a little bit, and it also dies really fast. And some of the other cheeses that are harder and don't have a ton of mold in, growing through them, they can age. I could have walked around with a Mahone for 3 months in Spain, and brought it home and it would be fine. But it's just the nature of these cheeses. And certainly some of these wash rind cheeses, a week out of refrigeration and they're just toast.
Yeah.
So.
No, I think you bring up a really great point, Will. Like, you never see an extra age Blue. There is no 2-year Stilton, right? It's a very small window in many ways. And also, just because I mentioned Stilton so many times, seasonality in cheese is something I think is fascinating. And one of the things I love seasonality in cheese is it's different than when you go to the store for produce, right? I know it's citrus season because there's so much more citrus in the store there is any other time of year. It's ready now. But with cheese, you have to think about how long it aged. So we eat Stilton at Christmas because Christmas Stilton is summer milk, right? It's about a 6-month, 5-month cheese. And so if I eat it during Christmas, I'm eating July's perfect grass. And but you don't have any of this, like, what did last July's taste like? Because it's too volatile. It will taste like dust by the time I get to it, or really, really too much. So yeah, it's this beautiful snapshot. I thought it was a beautiful way you said it, a firefly, and you want to catch it. And, all of these cheeses are really kind of volatile cheeses in and of themselves. Yeah, as we're thinking about the stinky things, I want to give a shout out to the Stinkiest Cheese. I feel like it's a natural question to come out. Poisse is the natural stinkiest normal cheese, but there's a cheese called Stinking Bishop that I feel like if you cut a wheel of Stinking Bishop at home right now on the Zoom call, I could smell it. It's real. And I also think it was just designed to be the stinkiest cheese ever known to man. So I tend to hate on it, but yeah, it's fun. For some people, it's the perfect cheese, right?
A couple questions coming for you,
please,
Zach,
Benji.
real quick. First, people obviously still loving the wines. One person says Barneveld is the only one they prefer with the red, and they're traditionally a red person, which was interesting. We also had the Bay Blue with Riesling is divine. And then a couple of questions about pairing. So one, as a bourbon guy, which of these would you recommend for pairing with a bourbon? And then pairings with mustard, if you have any recommendations for that.
Mm-hmm. So pairing with bourbons is fun. To me, the two things I kind of look for when I think of bourbon, Scotch, whiskey, really any of those category is I want a cheese that I can take something that's like nutty and play it into being woodsy, right? And so we obviously get the barrel in all of those bourbons. And so Bay Blue, that little bit of like almond note that someone mentioned earlier, or that blueberry, that's going to go with the sweet and the woodsiness that I have of that. So that's my first thought. I think that the Valdéon for a rye, if I want to play out that spicy note, that might be the move right there, because I think both of those are going to be really nice. For the washed rinds, it might be a little more difficult difficult because I think that, we got kind of mild wash rinds. Our stinky cheeses are not like the biggest punch in the face, but I do think that I would probably try the Nababbo. I wonder if that fruitiness would be really fun and play with kind of the sweeter nature of bourbon. Yeah, those are my first guesses. So Nababbo on the wash and Bay Blue on the blues for bourbon. Benji, there was another question I think in there. I got lost.
Mustard in the
Thank you.
cheese.
Mustards. I think that's a cool idea. Mustards in the wash rinds is going to go really well full on because, to me, what I'm thinking of is back to that pot of mac and cheese, right? We sometimes use mustard to give it a backstop of flavor to dry it out into, yeah. And so I think that if a little bit of mustard with that brick cheese would be really nice. With the blues, I think it's going to start to get a little muddy in flavor. And so I might try to stick with the Barneveld, which is, to me, back to the like rind question. There's no rind. It's a little bit more just straight down the middle. It is spicy. It is a lot of flavor, but I don't have a bunch of different tangents going on with that flavor. So that's my first instinct. And I would probably go with a mustard that had a little bit more sweetness or tangents. I would stay away from a Dijon and go to something like a Violetta mustard with, the grape mustard, purple mustard, or we have that smoked cranberry mustard from Gus and Gray, which would be great with all of these. I really love that mustard because the sweet and the smokiness really makes it go from something that's really going to be on most sandwiches, but not a whole lot of other applications. That smoked cranberry mustard becomes just a great cheese accompaniment. What other questions, my friends? We blew through a lot of cheeses really fast. Let's talk about chocolate, and then let's open up the floor for any discussion or questions that you guys might have about cheese. I would love to hear more. Will, do you feel like talking chocolate? Like me too. Is he still there? I'll do it then. Okay. I get nervous when I know Will's on because he knows a lot more about chocolate than I do. I talk a lot, but Will's really he's our chief chocolate officer. So always we love to have a nice treat. And this is
you're gonna have to go ahead on chocolate because it's about to be bedtime and there's a lot of background chatter going on here.
Fair enough. The twins are just waiting till they can present to you guys. They have a lot to say about all of this stuff. I recently saw a great video of one of them talking about Black Betty. See, I could just hear them start talking. So Maru, many of you guys have had this, but it was not just throw in the safe one. I love Maru chocolate with blue cheese. It's one of our very first cheese and chocolate pairings we ever kind of stumbled across. The intensity of a really dark chocolate and the intensity of blue cheese can just be awesome. And so before you guys start tearing open your bar and trying it with the cheese, or actually you can do that while I talk, to just take a couple seconds and remind everybody of our focus in chocolate and why we do what we do. We love craft chocolate. We're really passionate about this idea of bean to bar chocolate, of direct source chocolate. We love the flavors chocolate give us, but we love also the ability to talk about, the whole globe. So much of cheese and wine happens, northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere, but the equator is not very common for these products. And chocolate only grows between 20 degrees north or south of the equator. And the story of chocolate, as many of us know, because you've heard me say this so many times, it's been so poorly told for so long, right? If I asked everybody on this call their favorite chocolate, somebody's going to say Swiss, Belgian, German, Pennsylvania for Hershey's. People are going to say all sorts of things, and none of them are wrong necessarily. But I would challenge you or push you to answer the whole question. There's two parts to this, right? Where was the chocolate grown and where was it made? All of the countries I just listed are great chocolate manufacturing places. You can't grow Thrombium cacao in any one of those locations, right? We can grow it we can grow it in Cuba, but we cannot grow it in southern Florida. And so Maru is in the southern part of Vietnam, right? They're probably only maybe a third of the country is actually in a cacao growing region. And Maru is a really interesting company because it's two gentlemen who saw great potential in Vietnamese chocolate. They're both from families that are part Vietnamese, part American, I believe, and then part Vietnamese, part French, if I recall, but I could be wrong. Either way, they were both on a trip to Vietnam and they saw these beautiful cacao trees that have been mostly neglected, or if they were still being harvested, they were being sold on a commodity market, right? Chocolate was brought to Vietnam by the Belgian and the French occupation. And it's all about growing chocolate and bringing it to the motherland. And I think that that's so common of the story of chocolate. But what was really cool is when Maru started to make chocolate, it wasn't just about selling a better product or getting more money for the cacao that was already growing in the region. They also were really focused on growing a culture within Vietnam. And so they've opened up, I believe, 2 different cafes. So you can go ahead and get a drinking chocolate from Lam Dong versus drinking chocolate from Doc Lock, and taste differences and really get a sense of pride for, what's so special about this part of that country. I have the Ben Tray, which is one of their highest percentages, which is perfect for blue cheese, right? I really need quite a bit of stuff. If I just had a Hershey bar, it's going to get just lost. You need a big dark chocolate for these blues. I think if I was to guess which ones are going to be the best, I would try with the Bay or the Barneveld. With the chocolate, it'll be fun, and that ratio will matter. And so what I would suggest is getting a piece. I don't know why I'm not opening it myself and just telling you. Probably was a bunch of these half open in the cupboard, but we want a piece probably about, let's show you, this big. Boom, a nice shard. And then I want to take maybe half of that size of blue cheese, right? If I did the same size chocolate and blue cheese, I'm not going to taste much chocolate. But and I'm going to have a little red wine wash that down. I'm curious how this wine goes with the chocolate. So often we hear people ask us to pair chocolate and wine, and we're very quick to tell people dried red wine is bitter, chocolate is bitter. Sometimes it's not the nicest pairing. So often we want to have port and chocolate or these softer wines, and I think that this wine really accomplishes a lot of those things. And so I'm curious if this is going to go well. What questions do we have while I sit here and eat chocolate and drink wine?
We do have a couple of comments. The Maru, Barneveld, and Red is insane. We have a Maru and Barneveld +3, another Barneveld and Red. So people are loving the combinations here.
Good. I'm glad that you guys like this. This wine was really a treat for us. Like I said, we don't usually get to have a lot of fun with 10-year-old wines, and this is really a unique wine. And I really do think the softness and the relaxed nature of it, it goes great with the chocolate. It goes great with all 3 of them. So I love it. What other questions do we have, guys?
No questions yet, but while we wait on questions, you want to tell them about the upcoming tasting that we announced earlier this morning?
I do. So if anybody here has ever seen my TEDx, where I go into this discussion of the history of the American cheese revolution, I talk about a very specific time from like 1968 to 75 or so. I was not there, right? I'm not that old. But from what I hear, there was not like goat cheese, like the cheese scene that we all love, that I have a job selling and talking about, did not exist, right? Allison Hooper loves to tell the story of when she decided to make goat cheese for the first time, people thought she was nuts. But what's crazy to me is that like 5 women had this idea within a couple of years, all different parts of the country. And what they did was really start what picked up momentum and created an American cheese revolution. Cheese has always been a part of the American story, but industrialization really kind of obscured that discussion for a really long time. And these 4 or 5, 6 women, depending on how you count it, they brought us back in a major way. So we're going to do a deep dive into goat, and we're going to talk about some of these OGs like Laura Chanel, Allison Hooper, Judith Shad, Mary Keene and Redwood Hill Goats, Jen. I can't remember her last name, Jennifer Barnes, maybe. Either way, some really amazing women who made amazing goat cheese, and many of them continue to make amazing goat cheese. And we're going to deep dive into goat as well as their story. Other things that are fun right now going on at the store, it seems that in my paternity leave, there's been some really cool grilled cheeses going on. I've been loving what I've been seeing on Instagram, but there's been a bunch of fun specials between the kimchi grilled cheese, and I know right now they're working on a special mushroom truffle oil grilled cheese. There's also the return of tomato soup. It's winter outside, so there's nothing more comforting than a little tomato soup. And this year we have gone in-house. Matthew and the team are making a bunch of cool variations of tomato soup. A couple weeks ago, it was vegan with coconut milk. This last batch is with harissa, a Tunisian pepper paste that is one of my all-time favorite condiments, period. And we now carry in the store from Majid Majoub. But there's a lot of really cool things going on. Hot chocolate's back, as well as the Mongers branded hot chocolate packets you can buy to go try drinking chocolate at home. And I do want to remind everybody, it's a drinking chocolate. It's not quite, it's very different than like a Swiss Miss packet, but it's a really rich, luscious chocolate and much more similar to how chocolate was drank for, most of history. The chocolate bar, new invention. Chocolate bar came out around the same time as this, around 1860, 1870. So for thousands of years, though, we drink chocolate before then. So there's a lot of fun stuff at the store right now. Please come on by, and of course, check us out on all the different ways you can. If somebody really likes looking at pictures, we're all over Pinterest and Instagram. If you love listening to us talk, we have some great YouTubes where we go through different tastings. And of course, the website's active, and we're adding items all the time. So if there's anything we could send to the house, deliver, ship, whatever, please know. We just love connecting with us. It's been such a crazy year, obviously, and it means the world to us that we get to, not just sit here and do this, but when we sign on every time, it's so many familiar faces. It's really very special. I feel like we built a really wonderful community together, and we just can't wait to keep eating cheese with you all. So also, I want to encourage you all to send in your ideas. New Year's Eve was part of a suggestion at the tasting before, and we continue to try to listen as best we can. So if you guys have subject that you want to deep dive in, if it's Spanish cheeses like Will mentioned, or if it's, cheddar, what does it really mean? Let's have a tasting about it. I know that we did our AGC series, Alpine Gouda Cheddar, but there's a lot of other categories that we can deep dive. So please let us know, drop it into the chats, hit us up. Yeah.
Cool.
Benji, you have anything else?
We do have a lot of questions that flew in while you talked about it. So first question, what's your favorite blue outside of the ones that we tasted tonight?
Easy question. Rogue River Blue. Rogue River, I imagine a handful of you guys have tried it, but it's a cheese coming out of Rogue Creamery in Oregon. It's wrapped in grape leaves that have been soaked in a pear brandy, and it sits all together, and it just creates its own symphony of flavor. It's a cheese that won the World Cheese Expo a couple of years ago. First time an American cheese has ever won. So it brings us a lot of national pride as American cheese fans, and it also is it's freaking amazing. So that's definitely it.
Well, what is the best way to keep these cheeses? Wrappers, containers? How especially knowing that Stinkies can get a little crispy and runny. What's the best way to do this?
So this is I always suggest you use our cheese paper again, right? Our cheese paper is micro-perforated. It's supposed to mimic an eggshell. So all of the ammonia that the blue cheese is farting, it's off-gassing, it can get out of your wrapper, and you want to keep all the oxygen away. So our wrappers are really good. If you've already discarded all of that, don't worry. Don't start digging through the trash. Parchment paper with a little tin foil on the outside or saran wrap on the outside. The parchment paper is going to touch the cheese and give you a pretty good wrap, but it's not quite as tight of a wrap as saran wrap or something like that. These cheeses, Will mentioned, they're so alive. There's so much happening that if I put this in a Ziploc bag or Tupperware, I'd say within like 3 days, it's just going to taste like ammonia. No matter how much I air it out, it's just going to be saturated. It's ammoniated. So these cheeses, you really want them to be in a wrap that has enough room to breathe.
We have blue cheese tomato soup. Someone called out as being a great, with a Michael Simon recipe there. We got will there be a smooge and cheese pairing as well as a deep dive hard seltzer smoothies?
Those smooch things are crazy. If anybody who's not heard of these, they're a hard seltzer with real fruit juice. And so you have to store them upside down, because if you don't, when you open them, you'll just have all the fruit on top and not the seltzer. And so you flip it and you pour it, and it pours as this like thick smoothie with booze in it. I would argue they're a little too much fun. You got to be careful with those. Don't let the kids try them. They'll like them way too much. And maybe we'll do a pairing with that. That's a cool idea.
A lot of love for the chocolate still. People really enjoyed it, especially mixing them in with the blues. So obviously good there. And Will's holding up a LaCroix. So that's always special for everybody.
The seltzer of the gods.
We will probably not be doing a LaCroix tasting though. Maybe we'll do a artisan water tasting at some point. That's something I could get behind. Well, friends, sure you don't want to hear me ramble on about silly ideas, but once again, thank you guys so much. This is such a treat. We absolutely adore all of you. This is really, we enjoy this more than we can ever tell you. And from all of the different tired fathers on this, Benji and I we thank you very much. Will, thanks you. And we hope to see you guys soon for the next tasting at Goat in March. And yeah, we got to come up with April's tasting. So let us know what you guys think we should be doing.
And feel free to unmute yourself at the end here if you wanna say anything. It's kind of a free for all at the end, so you are welcome to hang out for a bit if you'd like.
Awesome job, guys.